Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a story you probably think you already know inside and out. David and Goliath. Honestly, it's arguably the most famous showdown in human history. But as we look at the source material together, we might actually find that our usual takeaways are completely missing the point. We're going to use what I like to call the iceberg method. We all know the tip of the iceberg, right? The kid with a slingshot who takes down the giant. But let's dive below the surface to uncover the massive historical, geographic, and theological realities resting right underneath this famous text. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. Number 1, the ultimate underdog myth. Number 2, tension in the Elah Valley. 3, delivering cheese to a war. 4, a contrast of kings. 5, why 5 smooth stones. And finally, number 6, the true champion. Section 1. The ultimate underdog myth. This story is universally famous. I mean, it's practically synonymous with overcoming insurmountable obstacles. But I want to pose this question right up front for us. What is the story of David and Goliath really about? In our modern interpretations, it's almost always framed as this self-help metaphor. We're told to find our inner David and face our personal giants. But according to our sources, that interpretation entirely misses the mark. If we look closely at the theological theme of the text, it's actually about borrowed victory. It's about trusting a champion to fight and win on your behalf. You see, in the original context, we aren't actually supposed to identify with David. We are the paralyzed, terrified Israelite army. David acts as the representative champion for his people. He steps into the gap to secure a victory that they simply could not win themselves. Section 2. Tension in Elah Valley. To really understand the stakes of this borrowed victory, we've got to look at the geography. This wasn't just some random field. The land of ancient Israel was divided geographically. In the west, along the Mediterranean, you had the flat coastal plain. This was Philistine territory, including Goliath's hometown of Gath. To the east, forming the central spine of the land, was the hill country, where the Israelites lived, including David's hometown of Bethlehem. Between them were these rolling hills and broad valleys that acted as vital travel corridors. And this brilliantly illustrates the severe military tension of the moment. The Philistines weren't just wandering around aimlessly. They were executing a highly strategic movement through the Elah Valley, pushing from west to east. Their ultimate target? Bethlehem. If they captured Bethlehem, they could literally split Judah in half and control the vital north-south artery of the hill country. So when David from Bethlehem meets Goliath from Gath in the Elah Valley, it's absolutely not a coincidence. It is a vital clash to protect the very heart of Israel. Let's break down the sheer physical reality and sensory scale of this mismatch. Goliath was an absolutely terrifying force of nature. Our sources note he stood nearly 9 feet 6 inches tall. Plus, he was draped in 125 pounds of impenetrable bronze armor. Just the iron head of his spear alone weighed 15 pounds. In stark contrast, you have David. He was a youth with 0 armor, carrying nothing but a shepherd's sling. The visual disparity would have been utterly staggering to anyone watching. Because of this overwhelming physical dominance, the Israelite army was completely paralyzed by fear. For 40 days, Goliath marched out into the valley. Morning and evening, he shouted blasphemous taunts, defying the ranks of Israel and their God. Think about that. That's 80 total times this giant challenged them, and 80 times an entire army backed down in terror. Section 3. Delivering cheese to a war. This is exactly where David enters the story, and there is a fascinating irony to his arrival here. He traveled roughly 15 miles from his home in Bethlehem to the battlefront at Gibeah. But he wasn't marching off to join the glorious fight. No, his father sent him on a mundane errand to deliver roasted grain, 10 loaves of bread, and 10 cheeses to his older brothers and their commander. He was basically the ancient equivalent of an Uber Eats driver dropping off lunch in a war zone. There is a striking quote from the source material that sums this up perfectly. Obedience in obscurity is often the launching pad for God's greatest work. From a human perspective, David was just running an insignificant errand. But from a divine perspective, his simple obedience in delivering cheese brought God's anointed man to the exact right place at the exact right time to finally hear Goliath's taunts. Section 4. A contrast of kings. While the physical battle lines were drawn out in the valley, a really profound character study was taking place behind the scenes between Israel's current king and its future king. King Saul had the physical resume.
The text tells us he was a full head taller than anyone else in Israel, and he had previously led armies to victory. But spiritually, he was an empty shell. The Spirit of the Lord had departed from him. He was trying to lead God's people without God's power, leaving him terrified. On the other side, you have David. He was young, but he had been anointed, and he carried the Spirit of the Lord with him. He was driven entirely by faith.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how their vastly different spiritual states created completely different perspectives. When the paralyzed men of Israel looked at Goliath, they said, "Have you seen this man?" They only saw an unbeatable physical giant. But when David looked at Goliath, his immediate response was, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" David saw right past the physical size and immediately recognized the spiritual essence of the conflict. To David, God was alive, active, and far bigger than any man in bronze armor.
Section 5. Why 5 smooth stones?
When David finally gets permission to fight, he famously goes down to a wadi and picks up exactly 5 smooth stones for his shepherd's sling. This detail has sparked a lot of academic debate over the years. Some people assume David picked 5 stones because he lacked faith and thought he might miss, but commentaries point to a totally different reality. First, it was practical readiness. David was preparing for additional attackers. Specifically, later biblical texts mention that Goliath had 4 giant relatives from Gath. David was simply loading up for whoever wanted to step into the valley next. Choosing 5 stones wasn't a sign of doubt at all. It was a combination of smart, practical preparation and total trust that God would deliver him, whether it took 1 stone or all 5.
King Saul had actually tried to dress David in his own royal heavy armor, but David refused. It was untested. Instead, he took his humble, everyday shepherd's tools. The irony is so powerful here. The rich, heavy armor of an unfaithful king was completely useless, while the simple stones of an obedient youth were exactly the instruments God utilized to prove that the battle belongs entirely to the Lord.
Section 6. The True Champion.
Let's move to the ultimate point and see how this builds a profound theological picture. As we reconstruct this story, we have to connect it to the broader biblical narrative. Just look at David's actions here. 1, he is an obedient son sent by his father. 2, he arrives on the scene to provide bread for his brothers. And 3, he ultimately steps out alone to defeat a terrifying enemy and deliver his people. For those familiar with the New Testament, this is direct theological foreshadowing. David is a preview of Jesus Christ, who was sent by the Father, offered himself as the bread of life, and defeated the ultimate enemies of sin and death on behalf of all humanity.
This completely flips how we should read the text. Bringing our iceberg method full circle, this story is fundamentally not a motivational call for you to try harder to face your personal giants. It is a call for you to humbly trust God who steps in to slay them on your behalf.
As one of our sources beautifully summarizes, we are to borrow the victory of Jesus. Just as the terrified army of Israel suddenly surged forward and ran in the victory that David won for them, we are invited to run in the victory that has already been won for us. The pressure isn't on you to be the hero. The hero has already arrived. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Whether you are running a mundane errand or facing an absolutely terrifying circumstance, do you trust that the living God makes a difference on the battlefield of your life? Are you relying on your own untested armor, or are you resting in the victory of the true champion? Think on that. Thank you so much for joining us to explore the depths of this amazing history, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.